Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the digital event Pivot and Grow, even in a global pandemic, with Joe Omani. My name is Ellen, and I'm an events executive at CMI. I will shortly be handing over to Joe, who will be running the session today. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen. We shall answer as many as we can. Today's session is being recorded and it will be shared with you soon, along with a PDF copy of the slides. Now over to Joe, Professor of Consulting and CEO of Consulting Master, to begin.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. I'm going to talk relatively fast because I want you to have as much value for this as possible. I don't have, the wonderful thing about academics is they don't have anything to sell you. So I'm just interested in being useful. If you have questions, fire them over. I'm writing a book on this at the moment, which is due next year. And I'm more than happy to share sections or chapters with you if you think it might be useful. So just let me know. You can contact me at joe@consultingmaster.com or befriend me on LinkedIn. Okay, so the agenda. We're going to cover what the problem is. So I'm an academic. You always start with a research problem, the methodology, what a buyer's looking for, and the 7 systems of growth that I think I'll probably be basing the book around. Don't worry about the first 2. They sound academic, but they're not. We'll go through them fairly quickly. So what's the problem? Okay, so small firms are small consulting firms grow 4 times faster than large firms. So the average growth rate of small consulting firms is 20% in terms of the market growth. With large firms, it's around 5%. So it's a wonderful sector to be in, especially for the last 15 years, perhaps not so much in the last year. But consultancy has seen year-on-year growth pretty much since the 1950s. Especially if you invest in Accenture. 300 are sold each month. However, this is the problem. There's very little advice out there. And the advice that is out there is either written by people who want to sell you things, or it's written by people who have sold their consultancy, grown and sold their consultancy, but you can't generalize from a case of one. So I guess I got a bit embarrassed being a professor of consulting, and I got embarrassed with old friends of mine who are in the consulting industry. I used to be a management consultant, coming to me asking for advice about starting and growing their firms, and I would tell them fairly general, obvious stuff about small firm growth. So this is really a project of mine that I have been working on for the last 2 years. I've been a consultant, internal, external, independent, and now been studying the consulting industry and teaching about it for about 25 years. So this is my latest specific project. Typically, there is support for consultancies that want to sell, but only when they're big and selling, because the big firms that advise on this, like Equitech, are interested, obviously, in maximizing the revenue. They get a percentage of the fee, the transaction fee. And so they'd rather that they sold firms at 10 million and above, rather than selling firms who are around 4 million or less. So there's virtually no advice for firms that are around 4 million or less. And just because you've had experience as a partner in a big firm, it doesn't mean that you're going to be particularly good at growing and selling your own firm. It's a very different kettle of fish, as many of you will know. So that's why I got involved with the project. In terms of what the project's looking like, I've done 75 interviews. 50 of them were with founders who started their firm, grew it, and then sold it. I've interviewed 50 of them over the last year. I've interviewed 19 founders who wanted to grow their firm, but failed to. Either, I can talk more about this later, but generally it was because their business systems couldn't keep up with their expansion, or because they didn't keep an eye on their pipeline. I've interviewed 6 buyers of consulting firms, most of whom have asked to remain anonymous, but I've anonymized them in the book. And also I've been doing, obviously, as an academic, a vast amount of reading, and I've got my own experience. The firm I started, Consulting Mastered, helps small consultancies grow. So I've got a lot of coaching experience there as well. So what I'm about to tell you draws on all of this. Okay, we're okay for time. So number 1, what are buyers looking for? Now, this information is available on the web. There's too much information. There's a lot of bad advice out there actually. So before you spend a lot of money on an online course, typically given by an improbably young, usually a male, in a cheap suit, do check out, because a lot of the advice on the internet comes from internet marketing people. And pretty much they say that you can grow a successful consultancy by building clickbait or leads on the internet, having some type of funnel that drags them through to your website, and then having a hard sell webinar where you set up calls. Now that doesn't work for consultancies, because as you know, the consulting industry is based on trust. It's not transactional, and no one is going to buy a £20,000 project for you or £200,000 project on you based upon clickbait. So do be careful when you're out there looking for advice on the web. So what are buyers looking for? This is in terms of priority. Most buyers prioritize growth above EBITDA, your margins. I think it was 65% of buyers that I surveyed would rather a firm was high growth rather than high profits. They would choose growth over than profits. Now, there's obviously a balance there, because sometimes you need to take some of those profits and invest in growth, and that obviously damages your profits if you're coming up to sale. Buyers are aware of that. They're not stupid, so they do understand that growth requires investment, and investment is often at the cost of margin. Revenues now. Nearly a third of consulting firms that are sold with less than £4 million worth of revenue each year. However, the deals do get very big. I typically find that there's an inflection point at around 30 people. Where you need to really professionalize your systems. You need to have some form of PSA, professional service automation software, and you need to be formalized about roles and processes, systems, etc. However, a lot of consultancies purposely sell before they get to that point, because they don't like designing systems or managing systems. Intellectual property, we'll talk more about that later. A long-term distributed client base. The advice is typically that no client should take up more than 20% of your revenue. That's obviously easier to achieve if you're a larger firm. So the expectations are higher on larger firms, because the expectation is that you will have systematized, you will have thought strategically. Whereas if you're a small firm, it's slightly different. Very often with the small purchases, they're much more likely to be seen to be buying the team. So typically you'll get a lot, some bright artificial intelligence students who leave. They can't keep up with the work. They're really bright, but they don't really have a business. It's really the team. So very often, if they're successful, a consultancy or private equity will buy the team, so try and get the individuals rather than buying the business. And that's obviously something that you want to avoid if you want to avoid a long earn-out period, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, comments in the question list. So in terms of the price that you'll be getting, typically it's based around EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax and other deductions. The price multiples are there. However, this is a big generalization. It's heavily moderated by a number of factors, but especially growth. If you're in the right niche, if you're doing cybersecurity consulting, and you've been doing that for the last 5 years, it's virtually impossible not to want to be, or not to be approached by people who want to buy you. It's a massive area. There's obviously other massive areas that I can talk about in more detail if you want, but you'll know what they are. IT is a massive one. If you look at the consultancies that I've interviewed that have been sold, I'd say that 3/4 of them have some type of digital element. It's very rarely AI, but very often they've got their typical standard management consulting practice with add-on services that are web-based, perhaps software as a service, perhaps an app, perhaps some type of algorithm crunching database doing big data. Okay. as I say, sorry I'm talking fast, but I want to get a lot of good information across to you. So I'm going to cover 7 systems that seem to be crucial to consultancies that successfully grow. Now, this isn't to say that every consultancy that was successful did all of these things. In fact, I can probably think of only 1 or 2 consultancies that have done all of these things successfully. You can be a successful consultancy without having to do all of these things. However, if you do all of these things, you're much more likely to maximize your multiple when it comes to selling, and also have a less stressful time. It's relative. It's not difficult. It is difficult, but it's not, it's not impossible to grow and sell a consultancy successfully. But it is difficult to do it well, to do it without too much stress, to do it without not seeing enough of your family, etc. So there is that caveat. The other thing I would say is that many of you on here might be thinking, well, I don't want to sell. And that's fine. You should still, if you're growing a consultancy, you should grow it as if you are going to be selling it, because buyers want to buy a successful consultancy, and a successful consultancy is one that you want to grow, regardless of whether you want to sell it or not. There are some exceptions to that. Sometimes buyers will want you to do things that aren't necessarily what I would say a good business, and some of that is around niche. Buyers are very often focused on a specific niche service sector in a specific geography. However, a good consulting firm may have diversified quite significantly. And buyers very often, when they're looking at a firm, may say, well, we were only interested in this part of the practice. So there are caveats to that I can get into in more detail if you wish. Okay, so what do I mean by a system? I think everyone on here understands what a system is, but the key thing is that it is improvable, that you're capturing knowledge and experience, that the system has goals in terms of outputs, and that you're continuously focused on improving them. And it's the focus on improvement that is crucial here. Your day rates or your fees can only go up if you provide more value. In fact, that's a lie. They can go up if you're a better negotiator, and they can go up if you price intelligently. I could talk for all day about pricing. What I've asked Ellen to do is to share a bit from my book about pricing, because I usually get a lot of questions on that. So Ellen, if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then I can just get on. So I'm not going to go into pricing in any detail. If you're interested, read the 4 or 5 pages I'm firing across. In fact, if you have time, this book by Kevin Doolan is outstanding on pricing, but it is 266 pages, fairly thick text. And yeah, it's aimed at professional service firms generally. Anyway, on to other things. So you know what a system is? It's focused on improving the business through systematic processes that allow you to capture and improve your experiences. Okay. So the first system, strategy. It amazes me the number of very senior people who don't really get what strategy is. Most people think it is, this is where we want to be, and the plan is how to get there. Well, that's all very well, but that completely forgets your competitive advantage. If everyone's trying to be, a highly successful firm in your sector, then how do you compete against them? And that's really where the core strategy is. You want self-reinforcing systems. And this is really why I focused on systems rather than departments or purely finance. The secret to growing a good consultancy is around systems. It's not about financial structuring or managing your departments well. Those aren't mutually exclusive, of course. So in terms of strategy, you should see what you're doing as a set of self-reinforcing systems that together over time provide you with a competitive advantage over others. And that's very much around accumulating experience and expertise in these systems. In terms of strategy, niche is obviously, everyone talks about niche and what's your niche, but it amazes me how many bright, able people not only choose a bad niche in the first place, and by bad, I mean, I'll go on to that in a minute, but I mean low day rates and clients that are typically a pain in the backside, or fail to pivot. And your ability to pivot quickly. And we all know that, the consulting industry is very much a fashion-led industry. Business process re-engineering is still being done, but it's not called business process re-engineering. It's called lean. or something different. Total quality management is still being done, but it's not called total quality management. So your pivoting isn't necessarily to do with actually fundamentally changing what you do and your skills, but it is to do with changing your unique value proposition, what you present and what you are fundamentally in terms of customer delivery. In terms of things that go wrong, number one, if you look at the consultancies, it's starting in the wrong niche. If you start in, and obviously it takes time to find your niche. Typically consultancies, when they start up, they'll do anything. So they're pretty much doing anything in order to survive. What typically happens is that narrows down to a core niche, and then the consultancies expand in related services or markets, typically by services rather than expansion by markets, but both very often happens. And so you almost get a funnel approach where people realize what the niche is, they focus on the niche, building a reputation. Once they've got the reputation and the clients and the experience, and they're not constantly chasing new clients, then they start to build new services to offer their existing clients, etc. In terms of how I'm picturing that, where you want to be is that orange block in the bottom right-hand corner. So you want to be in a niche that is high margin and high quality, and also has relatively low levels of competition. But competition isn't as much of a challenge because there's a huge market out there for the right niche. So competition isn't necessarily a challenge. Okay, number two, leadership. In the book, I've written about the growth mindset, and that incorporates a number of things. It incorporates the entrepreneurial mindset. It incorporates what I call the humility mindset. It was a real shock to me, especially having worked in the consultancy for so long, how humble many of these founders were. And that serves a function in terms of they are open to learning. They're open to new experiences. In fact, I'll recommend another book. So this is something I'm just finishing at the moment. It's called Getting Naked. I don't have shares in these books. It's called Getting Naked. It's a great story by an experienced consultant about the importance of humility and authenticity in consulting, especially around sales, but generally in terms of practice and how it works. And he's been very successful using the principles in this book. The book does have a flaw, in that there is a business model that isn't around what he's talking about, and that business model can be very successful. I won't go into too much detail, but you can email me and we can have a discussion around it if you want. So mindset, the entrepreneurial, pushy mindset that is happy to take risks. Partnering, there is only one successful consultancy that I interviewed that didn't involve partnering. Now, this is a bit of a catch-22, because when you ask successful founders what their regrets are, typically the number 2 regret is partnering with the wrong people. And so it's a bit of a catch-22. But sometimes that's not because they didn't work together at some point. It's sometimes because the relationship went sour. And you can avoid that by managing the partnership well, by having partnership agreements early on. The third thing to do with leadership is really being responsible for the culture and values. And I know this sounds like BS, but it's not. And this was a genuine surprise to me, is the absolute importance of managing the culture, of establishing, managing and demonstrating the culture and values of the organization. And that is for several reasons, and they probably obvious to you. But number one is that it makes your firm sticky. So the big challenge, one of the big challenges that consultancies have is churn, especially if you're a small consultancy. How are you going to compete with McKinsey? Why should a bright graduate or an able person come to you when they could be going to McKinsey, Bain or Boston? Well, one of the reasons is your culture and your values. There are a lot of people out there who don't want to go and work for the big four or the MBB. They want to come and work for a firm that they feel comfortable in. And so if you can be clear and consistent on your culture and values, it allows you to be sticky. It's also a great way of bringing in clients and tying clients to you, making yourself sticky for clients. And there's lots of other reasons around enculturation and forming people in a way that is consistently demonstrates your brand. And so that's something I would say. Where things go wrong, which is always the red points in these slides, is people that have no appetite for risk, or they think they have an appetite for risk, but they don't, because they don't want to employ anyone, because employing people is seen as this, this horrific mire that's going to end up in the courts. Well, that may be the case, but there's strategic benefits for employing people that you don't get by using associates. I can talk more about that if you want. The other time when it goes wrong is where people are completely focused on working for the business rather than on the business. So they're not taking time to be the boss, to think about the strategy, to think about the systems. I don't mean generating content. I don't mean networking. That's something else that you should do at another time. But I mean thinking about the business. Are you in the right niche? Are your systems working? Can your systems be improved? Can you automate anything? Can you systematize anything? Are your databases, do they have good data? Is your data clean? And that type of stuff, the fundamental infrastructure of the firm and its strategy that leads that infrastructure. Okay, and I guess this is the other thing that I see in terms of leadership is that, and this is not just small consulting firms. I used to do consulting for small manufacturing firms, and you would see this very often, where you've got these, entrepreneurial, driven founders who, they've created this baby, and then it gets to a certain size and they don't want to let go. They hoard control. They're looking over people's shoulders. They don't trust the system. As Kroc, the guy who created McDonald's, said, you shouldn't trust the people, you should trust the system. Or at least you should build a system that you can trust. And so there's a transition that needs to take place with founders where you start to delegate. And that's not just the founders, it's not even just the partners. The directors and the managers, as you grow, need to delegate. I mean, that's how margins happen in larger firms. It's a delegation to the lowest point that's possible. And if you're a control freak, you're going to struggle with that. So at least being aware that you're a control freak is a good start. I can talk more about this if you want. Good. Okay, we're making good time. So number 3, expertise. As I said earlier, the most common... not the most common, the most effective way of improving your day rate or your charge out rate is by doing better work. You will only do better work if you invest in your systems, if you capture your experience, if you improve your knowledge, if you innovate. And that is something that it has to be system based after a while. Obviously you need time for training and you need time to read and you need time to research. And all of those things are important, but all of that needs to be strategic. It needs to be systematized, because if none of this is systematized, all you're doing is random stuff. And there's lots of consultancies out there, especially when it comes to marketing. They do a bit of Facebook, or they do a few tweets, or they do, and that, that's lovely. But if it's not systematized, you're not making the most of it. You have no checklist to know what good marketing is. The same is true of expertise. Every experience needs to be reflected in your templates, your processes, your systems, your methodologies, the services that you offer, so that they continuously improve. And it's that improvement that gives you strategic advantage, provides greater value for the client, and allows you to up your day rate and beat the competition every time. It doesn't just need to be captured, it needs to be stored and shared well. And sometimes that sharing is in the heads of the founders, and sometimes the mentoring model or the partnership model allows you to sort of have more of an apprenticeship style training. But sometimes that needs to very much be codified as well, depending on what type of company you are. When the things go wrong, number 1, when you have too low investment in the accumulation and capture of expertise, and also the research that underpins it, but also when you have too high utilization rates. I completely understand why growing firms do focus on utilization, but if the utilization is too high, and by high I mean over sort of 75%, then you're going to be getting, firstly, people will leave. Secondly, they'll have no time to innovate. And thirdly, they won't have time to really improve the processes and systems and manage the client beyond contract. Okay, good. This is something around intellectual property, which is obviously reflective of expertise. When people think about intellectual property, they generally think about the intellectual property of services. However, this comes from buyers. So this is what buyers are most interested in terms of intellectual property. And you'll see that buyers have a very wide view of intellectual property. So it's not just about the services and product that you give to customers. It's also about the internal methods and tools that you use, whether those have been continuously improved, whether they're standardized, whether people have been trained on them. It's also about thought leadership, and it's also about any unique databases that you have. And that's something that I would emphasize. People very often think of consultancy, just doing the consultancy themselves and providing the value as the consultancy. You would be surprised, those of you that have been running your company for 5 years or more, you would be really surprised at how much data you have in your systems that is really useful to your clients. And it is relatively easy to, if you can identify what that need is, to pull that out, in terms of, how have projects gone? What are the success factors? What do your best clients do? Pulling that information out of your, of your repositories and presenting it to clients can be a really powerful form of intellectual property. The other thing I would say is networks. I've seen a number of consultancies earn a huge amount of revenue by providing peer networks, where specific experts, it might be the chief strategy officer, or it might just be the HR, the HR director, where they provide them networks which exchange information on specific topics. They might provide research, they might provide get-togethers, they might provide guest speakers, they might provide something on the latest trends. And you can charge very high membership fees for these types of things. There's a consultancy called Water Street Partners that I've studied, who charge, I think it was around $120,000 for membership of their network each year. Now, obviously, that's quite niche. It's on mergers and acquisitions, but still not a bad little earner. Okay, I better move on. Number 4, services. So I kind of, mentioned services a little bit, but the seeing your service developments as a system, as something that needs to go through a series of checks that's continuously improved and is captured and managed as intellectual property, it's not just something that you do. And so thinking about what you do as a service or even as a product. So, you've got your consulting stuff that you deliver, but what add-ons can you offer? Is there an app that you can build? Is there a database that you can provide? Is there online video training that you can provide? All of this type of stuff adds value. It helps break the link between time and revenue, so your time and revenue coming in. So really important to think about how some of this can be systematized, captured, and ideally automated. Where things go wrong is where that isn't done, obviously. So I'm kind of just saying, well, this is the stuff to do and this is the stuff not to do. And they're obviously mirrors of each other in this case. So apologies. So thinking, as you start to grow, thinking more strategically about what services you offer to which markets. Now, most consultancies, when they grow, as I say, they tend to grow along service lines rather than offering the same service in different markets. But at some point, you'll probably be offering different services in different markets, but thinking about that strategically. So here's a simple example I've knocked up that I've used with a few clients, where you have service ABC, and you've got market ABC, whatever, and then you've got sort of a traffic light system for what's mature, what still needs developing, and perhaps something that needs planning. And then your presence of, you can see there's different ways of cutting this up depending on your own needs, but this is just an example of how you can capture a lot of information to see where new services should be launched and certainly where new services or different markets shouldn't be explored yet. I hope that makes sense. If not, give me a shout. Marketing is the 5th system. Now, as I say, there's quite, as I've said at the bottom here, there's a lot of incoherent marketing that takes place, and there's very little excuse for that now. I mean, I've always been a bit of a technophobe, but there are systems out there. There's CRM systems, there's marketing systems that allow you to automate, to standardize, to capture and do this stuff strategically. So there's no longer an excuse for just having your website. Now, don't get me wrong, there are successful consultancies that just have a website, and occasionally their CEO does a Trump-like Twitter that has everyone running around in panic. But if you do this strategically as a system, you're going to be much more successful. So managing your thought leadership well. Is your thought leadership timely? Is it useful to your clients? Is it something you can do? And is it something that has a call to action? Those 4 criteria, if you apply them to the thought leadership that I've read, I'd say it only applies to 25% of what's out there. There's a wonderful woman who does some research on this called Fiona Czerniawska. And I can also send you the section in my book on thought leadership if you're interested. Client relationship management. There are systems to do this. You don't need to do it all in your head now. Proactive testimonial management. 75% of consulting projects that are captured are done through repeat business or referrals or testimonials. Proactively managing and capturing that and sharing it effectively should be a system. It shouldn't be something that is done randomly through occasional emails to clients. And finally, your digital marketing architecture. And I don't mean to say, you need a complex architecture, but if I just go to the next slide, I think I've got something here. So this is relatively simple. I'm not going to talk through it because you may not be interested, but having a clear, logical system by which people are pulled to your website through, your posts on LinkedIn or your blog or whatever. A lot of this can be automated, and you're capturing this information in your CRM system, and then you're given reminders about when to call or when to email people and what type of stuff to email them, depending on what the audience is. Are they someone that you want to work with? Is it a lead that's cold or warm or hot, or is it someone that you're currently working with? What information do you need to be sending them, or is it someone that you've worked with in the past? What information is going to keep them warm and keep them amenable to you? And managing this effectively is I think one of the most crucial things you can do. I mean, obviously, sales is the number one challenge for growing consultancies, is constantly filling that pipeline. It can get too stressful if you're growing quite fast. But if you've got your ducks in a row when it comes to marketing, it's relatively straightforward. It's a lot of work setting these systems up, but you do it because it brings you long-term benefits. It frees up time, it increases your revenue, and it reduces your stress in the long term. So my argument is always that if you're going to have to do this at some time, if you're going to grow more than 30 people, you're going to have to do this. So my view is that you start to do the basics quite early. You keep your data clean, you keep your systems clear, and you codify them, and it saves you effort in the long term, and it certainly improves your profitability in the long term. Okay, number 6, sales. I kind of touched on this with marketing. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, it's not specifically to do with growth, but there's a huge amount of stuff on the internet about benefit selling. And benefit selling is great. So this is benefits rather than features. So you don't say, this phone has this processor, or it has this screen. You frame it in terms of the benefits for the client. You should all know this. But the research, interestingly, shows that very often you need to take the client on a journey towards the benefits. So very often just listing the benefits don't make a lot of sense to the client because they don't really understand what you're talking about. It does always surprise me the amount of posts on LinkedIn that assume that the client understands what you're offering. Well, of course they don't. It's natural to you because you've been immersed in this for however many years, but your client isn't going to necessarily understand what you're offering. So there's a journey, and there's some really good research, and I'm happy to share it if you email me. There's some really good research around what they call challenger selling. And that's someone that almost starts doing consultancy rather than doing sales. So you meet the client, or you offer the client consulting insights, consulting expertise. You challenge them quite strongly, and then they get to trust you, and then they get to understand what you're about rather than simply starting with the benefits. I could talk about that all day, and in fact I do with my MBA students, so I'm not going to do it here. Pricing. pricing. Oh, in fact, I'll have sent the thing to you on pricing. I think that's already there, isn't it, Ellen? So I won't cover that in any detail. Proactive account management, crucial. Those of you who are at this stage will know that it's a key feature of the successful consulting firms. Now, where does it go wrong? Number one, where sales isn't everyone's priority in the firm. So sales needs to be the priority of everyone in the firm. It needs to be part of the culture. It needs to be part of the metrics. It needs to be part of the performance management. It needs to be constantly communicated through meetings, emails, however you want to do it. But unless it is part of the very core of what you do as a firm, it's going to be a problem, especially if you're interested in growth. The other problem is procurement. You should avoid that if you can. Again, I could talk about this all day, but those of you that have experienced procurement will know that they are not the consultant's friend, except in very rare cases, and there are exceptions. So I won't go into that in any detail. Number 7, people. There are wonderful opportunities to systematize and really innovate when it comes to people. I would say, think about universities. Many of you might want to recruit graduates, but don't have the time or knowledge or expertise. Something that I have done for several consultancies who's come to me and say, or if I'm coaching them, they'll say, oh, we can really do with somebody who we can train up in this area, who isn't coming with their head already full of their own approaches to consulting, is really just put them in contact with course leaders, or even, go to the local university job shop and pay students, £15 an hour to do some research for you so you can get to know them. Students, there's loads of good masters students out there who, I'm not just saying this because I'm a professor and I love my students, but I do. There's great students out there who want to do their dissertation on something. They always very often they end up doing it on something boring. What they're crying out for is a consultancy to contact them and say, hey, I would love you to do X. Now, obviously, if you want to get Oxford MBA students, you're going to struggle because PwC, McKinsey, and the rest of them have that sewn up. But at the second tier of universities, at the Warwicks, the Durhams, the Bristols, the Cardiffs, of course, there are hundreds of great students who have specific skill sets who are looking for stuff to do. Anyway, I haven't put that in the slides, but there's something to be aware of. Number 1, hire on values. The only time people in my interviews regretted hiring someone was when they didn't hire on values. They hired on because someone was going to be useful, even though the values or cultural fit wasn't great. Number 2, share the love, share the equity. If you haven't shared the equity, when people find out that you're going to be selling, they're going to be looking around for a job. If that happens and people start to leave, and this very often happens in the buy-up to a sale, because typically the sale process can take a year or maybe even 18 months, people are going to leave. And every time someone leaves, the buyer's going to say, well, let's renegotiate, especially if they're senior people. So share the love. Bigger pie, smaller slice. Yep. Focusing on skills and innovation. The key core competence, or your key core competence, should be your ability to innovate. And that is not just innovation for your clients, it's also innovation internally for you. That is how this cycle of improved performance works. If that is not encouraged, if you're not providing people with the skills or time or training or support to do that, then it is unlikely you're going to be charging high fees. There's also, we can talk, the leverage model, David Meister has talked about. I've got his book down here somewhere. In fact, I've got a spare copy of his book. If anyone wants it, I'll fire it over to you free of charge. David Meister's Managing the Professional Service Firm. Great book, but 20 years old. It talks about leverage, role standardization, and that's how you can delegate things to a lower level so that you've got lower paid people doing higher quality work and there's more consistent, predictable outcomes. Where do things go wrong? No investment in culture and poorly managed leverage. Okay, so that's, I think, what have I got? Oh, look at that, 10:39. So I'm sure there's a whole load of questions there. This is the book that I'm writing. It's Growing and Selling a Consultancy Firm in the Digital Age. It will be coming out with Routledge, hopefully May next year, if not June. I've also started up the last couple of years a firm called Consulting Mastered, where we are running online courses around growth, and even if you're just an independent firm who doesn't want to expand, we're currently trialing a course. Because I'm an academic first and foremost, we'll probably only take on 50 people a year. So there may be a waiting list, which I apologize about. But work-life balance. I've got 2 little boys who are probably screaming downstairs right now. Anyway, enough of the irrelevant stuff. Sorry if I've spoken fast, but if you want more information, contact me. And I will now hand back to Ellen. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. So we've had quite a few pre-submitted questions, and the first one is from George. He says, thanks for the fascinating insights, Joe. If you had to distill it down to 1 or 2 major factors, what would you say are the key things that the consultants who have thrived this year have in common?
Okay, so what are the 2 factors that they have in common? Number 1 is luck. In fact, pretty much every founder I spoke to emphasized the role of luck, being in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. That is the key to surviving in COVID. If you are unlucky, the ability to pivot fast. The consultancies that did well during this period were the ones that very quickly changed their LinkedIn profile and looked at aligned services or products or skills that they could offer that would help their clients through this phase. That might be in terms of number one, changing the services they're offering, but also number 2 in terms of changing the markets. Obviously, some markets, I don't need to go into detail here because all the information is available out there. Some markets are more have been hit harder. So pivoting out of those markets quickly and spending money on advertising in the right area to the right people. A lot of this can be automated on LinkedIn, connecting with the right people, sending them the right messages, and offering those services quickly. So 2 things: 1, luck, which you can't do a vast amount about, but number 2 is pivoting quickly.
That's great. Thank you so much. This question is from Angela. Do you think that some of the larger consultancy firms could learn from the pivoting that you've witnessed in your research? And if so, what would be the key areas?
Okay, so this is the making elephants dance question. About, for those of you who are probably not old enough to remember it, but the book about IBM about can you make a large firms innovate and pivot quickly? Generally speaking, the answer is no. In fact, Boston Consulting Group did a study on this about 5 years ago, where they looked at the biggest problems for growth in firms. Why wasn't it successful? And I agree completely with their finding, is that the big problems are internal problems. They're not external problems. They're not to do with the market. They're to do with the bureaucracy, taking your eye off the customer, and the lack of innovation. Now, there are exceptions to this. For those of you that are interested, I would advise you looking at a consultancy called Elixir, ELIXRR, I think, which is an incredible firm that has managed to grow incredibly fast. They've just floated on the AIM stock exchange, of the London Stock Exchange, but the AIM market, and have still managed to keep very high levels of innovation despite being a highly profitable and now large company. However, they're fighting a day-by-day battle against bureaucracy, against squashing the innovation, against middle managers who want to control rather than enable. So I think, yes, completely, large firms can do this, but they have to fight this and really transform their organizations, because very often it's a cultural thing. I was asked into a large consultancy last year to help them with innovation. It's a very well-known strategy consultancy, probably the best known one, to help them with innovation, because their clients were saying, well, you're not innovative enough. We're going to smaller niche consultancies. And one of the things I said to them was, well, stop recruiting the same person. Stop recruiting in the same way. Stop using the case interview to recruit people who think in a very specific way. Stop recruiting the MBA graduates. Start diversifying. Their response to me was, well, can't you just, organize a training course on PowerPoint on how to be more innovative and creative. And so their recourse was PowerPoint, and of course that's not the answer. So this push against bureaucracy is really hard to do, and I don't think most large firms have an appetite for it, especially those that are floated on the stock exchange rather than privately owned, because you're chasing the short-term buck rather than the long-term view. So that wasn't a particularly I think it was insightful. I'm not sure it was a particularly helpful answer, but you need to transform the culture and the leadership before you can transform the rest of the organization.
Yes, thank you. And this is going to be the last question, and it's from David. Do you feel that the role of the management consultant will change significantly in the next 5 years? Any predictions on how?
Okay, so 5 years is a very short time span. I guess there has been a change in what consultancies are looking for. They've obviously diversified a bit, so you're no longer guaranteed a lovely job if you're a white young male having done an MBA at Oxford. Nothing wrong with that, of course. It was my alma mater, but they are diversifying because client boards are diversifying. The focus on IT has become more prevalent. So it's not just, they're not just looking at people who have done an MBA now. Obviously, AI, big data, machine learning is crucially important to them. And you can see that consulting strategies have diversified as well. If you look up Accenture's share price for the last 10 years, it's remarkable. And the way they've done that is by diversifying, especially into IT, but constantly staying ahead of the competition in terms of buying up the good firms and integrating those services with their own businesses. So the IT focus, the diversification, in terms of the basics, if you're a young person, still getting on in a consultancy requires the same thing. It's the focus on business development, sales, and networking. If you can do that well, and it's harder than people think, then you're going to get on and do well. So the fundamentals haven't changed, but the specific skill sets that consultancies are looking for have diversified considerably. And also, we should bear in mind, sorry, Ellen, I know you're keen to move on. You should also bear in mind that the consulting market has expanded massively. So over the last 30 years, it's trebled in size. And so, they can no longer take the 0.01% of elite, partly because they're all going into banking and Facebook and Google now, but partly because they need to recruit a lot more people. So there's been a huge diversification in terms of the types of people they're recruiting. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you, Joe, for your insights and expertise.
Thank you,
if
Ellen.
you're a member of the CMI, you can access Management Direct, which has a whole range of practical resources to help apply your learnings from today. The link is in the live comments and in the description box. For anyone new to CMI or those who haven't heard of the Management Direct portal, it's full of personal and professional development opportunities, including over 400 videos, 10,000 journal articles, 5,000 ebooks, and more. Again, the link is in the live comments. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care, everyone. Oh, Ellen, one quick thing. Could you share that that strategy document that I sent you? That might be a useful thing to get out at some point, maybe in an email.
I'll share that now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.